In 1914, a young man failed to kill someone, went to buy a sandwich, and accidentally started the deadliest war the world had ever seen. This is not a metaphor. This actually happened. Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. A Sunday. The city was buzzing with excitement, or dread, depending on who you were, because today one of the most powerful men in Europe was coming to visit. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, had decided to visit Sarajevo with his beloved wife, Sophie. His advisors warned him it was dangerous. He didn't listen. The royal motorcade moved slowly through the streets. 6 cars, soldiers on the running boards. But the security plan had a fatal flaw, and a group of young men in the crowd already knew it. His name was Gavrilo Princip, 19 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, tubercular, underfed, but burning with a conviction that had led him to this exact spot, on this exact morning. He was not alone. Scattered along the Archduke's route were 6 conspirators, a secret network called the Black Hand. Each one armed, each one ready. The plan seemed foolproof. It was about to fall apart spectacularly. When the royal car passed the first conspirator, Nedeljko Chabrinovich did what he'd rehearsed 100 times. He grabbed his bomb and he threw it. The bomb bounced off the Archduke's folded car roof and exploded 10 seconds later under the following car. It wounded a dozen bystanders, but Franz Ferdinand was alive. Shaken, but alive. In a panic, Chabrinovich swallowed his cyanide capsule and jumped off the bridge into the river. The capsule failed. The river was only 4 inches deep. He was immediately arrested, soaking and humiliated. The other 5 conspirators, scattered along the route, saw the chaos and froze. One by one, they failed to act. The moment passed. The Archduke's car sped to City Hall. The assassination had failed, or so everyone thought. At City Hall, the Archduke was furious. "So you welcome your guests with bombs," he reportedly told the mayor. The ceremony continued, awkwardly, while aides argued about what to do next. Should they cancel the visit, change the route? The military governor, General Potiorek, waved off the danger. He reportedly said, "Do you think Sarajevo is full of assassins?" He was, in fact, more right than he knew. Princip had heard the bomb. He knew Chabrinovich had failed. The other conspirators had vanished. The whole plan was unraveling. He was alone, unarmed with any plan, and his dream of political liberation seemed over. What do you do when your revolutionary plan collapses? Apparently, Gavrilo Princip decided to get something to eat. He walked into Moritz Schiller's delicatessen on Franz Josef Street, just around the corner. He stood at the counter, ordered food. In this moment, Gavrilo Princip was just a hungry, failed 19-year-old student. He had no idea that fate was about to hand him something no amount of planning could have arranged. Meanwhile, at City Hall, the Archduke's aides had finally agreed. Change the route. Drive straight along the Appel Quay to the hospital to visit the bomb victims. A new route, a safer route. They just forgot to tell the lead driver. The lead driver turned onto Franz Josef Street, the old route, by mistake. General Potiorek immediately shouted that it was wrong. The driver hit the brakes, right in front of Schiller's delicatessen. The car stopped. The engine stalled, trying to reverse on the narrow street. The car sat there trapped in the middle of Franz Josef Street, unable to move forward or back, for approximately 30 seconds. Princip walked out of the delicatessen and found himself face to face with Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the man he had tried to kill that morning, sitting in a stalled car, 5 feet away. History held its breath. In that moment, Princip made a decision. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a .32 caliber FN model 1910 semi-automatic pistol. His hand was shaking. The distance was almost too small to miss. He fired twice. The first bullet struck Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the jugular vein. The Archduke reached for his wife and uttered his last words. Sophie dear, don't die. Stay alive for our children." Both were dead within the hour. And Gavrilo Princip, who had failed that morning, who had gone to buy a sandwich, who had fired on pure instinct, had just lit the fuse of a war that would kill 20 million people. What happened next is called the July Crisis. 37 days in which the entire world stumbled toward catastrophe. Like dominoes, each nation making choices that seemed rational alone, but together produced madness. In Vienna, Emperor Franz Joseph, 83 years old, who had already survived more tragedies than any man should, read the dispatch. His advisors told him Serbia was behind this, and they wanted blood. Austria-Hungary sent Serbia a 10-point ultimatum so deliberately humiliating that Serbia could never accept it. That was the point. They wanted an excuse for war. Germany gave them a blank check, unconditional support. Whatever you need, we have your back. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany believed this would be a quick, contained war. He told his troops they would be home before the leaves fall. He was catastrophically wrong, but by the time anyone realized it, the machine was already moving. Europe in 1914 was a powder keg of alliances, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, the Triple Entente, France, Russia, Britain, each connected by treaty. Attack one, and you attack them all. The dominoes were lined up perfectly. Across Europe, millions of young men volunteered enthusiastically. In Britain, 500,000 enlisted in the first month. In Paris, in Berlin, in Moscow, men lined up around the block. They thought it would be glorious. They had no idea. The Western Front. 400 miles of trenches from Belgium to Switzerland. This was where the glory died, where young men discovered that modern warfare meant machine guns, mustard gas, and artillery barrages that never seemed to end. The trenches were rivers of mud, disease, and rats. Soldiers lived in holes in the ground for months at a time. Some sectors of the front barely moved for years. Men died by the thousands to gain 50 yards. July 1st, 1916. The first day of the Battle of the Somme. British forces suffered 57,170 casualties in a single day. The bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. All because a car took a wrong turn 2 years earlier. The mud of Passchendaele was so deep that men drowned in shell craters. Artillery shells killed men who were never found, simply absorbed into the ground. The scale of death defied language. Behind the front lines, the hospitals filled beyond capacity. Surgeons worked for days without sleep. A new kind of wound appeared, shell shock, invisible, debilitating, and officially dismissed as cowardice by commanders who had never been near a trench. On the Eastern Front, Russia collapsed from within. 3 years of catastrophic losses, over 1.7 million dead, broke the army and the government. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. Revolution swept Russia, and the war had only started because of a sandwich run. Dui introduced mankind to industrial-scale killing, poison gas, tanks, aerial bombing, submarines, flamethrowers. Technology raced ahead of humanity's wisdom. By 1918, no one remembered exactly why they had started fighting. 10 million soldiers died, 7 million civilians, 20 million wounded, entire generations of young men erased from France, Britain, Germany, Russia, villages emptied, families destroyed. A continent that had been the center of world civilization had torn itself apart. Who was Gavrilo Princip? Not the cartoon villain that Austrian propaganda painted. Not the freedom fighter that Serbian nationalists lionized. The truth is more complicated, and more human, than either version. He was born in 1894 in a tiny village in western Bosnia, one of 9 children of a postman. 6 of his siblings died in childhood. His family was so poor that his father had to beg a local monastery to accept him as a student. Sarajevo was an occupied city. Bosnia had been annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908. Young Bosnian Serbs like Princip grew up with a burning sense of injustice. Their land, their culture, under foreign control. He was radicalized not by hatred but by humiliation. He devoured revolutionary literature. He became obsessed with Pan-Slavism, the idea that South Slavic peoples deserved their own nation. He joined Young Bosnia, a movement of students who believed violence was the only language the empire would understand. Ironically, when he traveled to Belgrade to join the Black Hand, the Serbian nationalist terrorist organization, they rejected him. Too small, too young, too weak. He returned to Sarajevo with the pistol they gave him anyway, burning with something to prove. Princip was arrested immediately after the shooting. He tried to kill himself, first with cyanide that failed, then by slashing his wrists. He was 19 years old and already knew his life was over. Austria-Hungary wanted to execute him. They couldn't. He was too young under their own law. At his trial, Princip showed no remorse. "I am a Yugoslav nationalist," he told the court, aiming for the unification of all Yugoslavs. He did not understand what he had actually started. Most people rarely do. In prison, the tuberculosis that had already weakened him accelerated. His cell was deliberately damp. Bones in his arm became so infected they had to be amputated. He lost half his body weight. He spent the last years of the war he had started dying in darkness. On April 28, 1918, 7 months before the war he'd started finally ended, Gavrilo Princip died in his cell. He was 23 years old. He weighed 88 pounds. The Great War he had ignited was still consuming millions of lives he would never know about. The world Princip wanted, a Yugoslavia free of Austrian control, did eventually emerge. From the ashes of WWI, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was born in 1918. He got what he wanted, at a cost he never intended and probably never comprehended. The war ended in 1918, and the victors, Britain, France, America, gathered in Paris to punish Germany. The Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany completely, stripped her of territory, military, and treasure. Germany was crushed and furious. In Germany, a failed artist named Adolf Hitler stood on a beer hall table and told angry, humiliated Germans that they had been stabbed in the back. The resentment created by WWI and the Treaty of Versailles gave him his audience. His rise was a direct consequence of Sarajevo. World War II, which killed 70 to 85 million people, grew directly from the unfinished business and broken peace of WWI. One shot, fired by one hungry 19-year-old who stepped out of a deli at exactly the wrong moment, set in motion a chain of events that would reshape all of human civilization. The end of WWI also dismembered the Ottoman Empire, and British and French officials drew new borders across the Middle East with a ruler and a pen, barely consulting the people who lived there. Many of the conflicts raging in that region today trace directly to those lines drawn in 1919. WI's chaos also enabled the Armenian genocide, over 1.5 million Armenians systematically killed by the Ottoman Empire while the world was too consumed by war to respond. One assassination, one wrong turn, cascading horror beyond imagination. Historians call it the long 20th century, a century of catastrophe that began in Sarajevo and only truly ended with the Cold War. Every major geopolitical crisis from 1914 to 1991 has roots in those two gunshots on a Sarajevo street. The pistol Princip used sits in a museum in Vienna today, a small, ordinary-looking handgun. If you stare at it long enough, you begin to understand how the most consequential moments in history are often triggered by the most ordinary objects. Today, you can stand on the Latin Bridge in Sarajevo and look at the spot where the car stopped. A plaque marks the location. Tourists take selfies. A tram passes in the background. Life continues, indifferent to history. The world has moved on. But has it really learned anything? And there, a few steps from the Latin Bridge, is where the delicatessen stood. The sandwich shop. The most consequential lunch break in human history. An ordinary storefront on an ordinary street that holds an extraordinary secret. Sarajevo today is a beautiful, resilient city. It survived WWI, WW2, and the horrific siege of the 1990s Bosnian War. The city has been at the center of history more than any place its size should ever be. And it endures. This is one of the last photographs taken of the old world. Within weeks, 30 countries would be at war. Within years, 4 empires would fall. The map of the world would be redrawn. And it all began with a missed shot, a wrong turn, and a sandwich. They had names: Wilhelm, Henry, George, Mehmed, James. They had families, dreams, jokes they liked to tell. They were not statistics. They were 20 million individuals, each of whom deserved a full life and got a muddy grave instead. The red poppy became the symbol of the fallen, growing from the blood-soaked fields of Flanders. Every year, November 11th, the world pauses to remember that wars are started by decisions and ended by the bodies of the young. A wrong turn, a stalled engine, a hungry young man stepping out of a sandwich shop. 20 million dead. The question history leaves us with: if one wrong turn can start a world war, what might one right turn be capable of creating?